All right. Welcome, everybody, back to Food for Thought. We are questioning everything they've ever said. They say a lot of shit, and we're going to answer some questions today about type 1 diabetes and carnivore and all that stuff. I have a very special guest. His content is fantastic. He puts on a clinic for type 1 diabetics on social media, all the way from Holland. We have Peter, the real Dutch carnivore. Hello, Peter. How you doing, man?
Hi, it's very nice to be here. I was looking forward to our talk. We watch a lot of our videos, of each other's videos,
Yeah.
and I think we're touching a lot of the same subjects. And it's nice to see. I mean, obviously we agree on a lot of things, and yeah, it's nice to exchange a lot of experience and to have a laugh about each other's videos.
That's it. Yeah. Peter brings an excellent balance of comedy with seriousness. And, I would just encourage before we even get started, any type 1 diabetic that wants to actually learn how to be a good type 1 diabetic, just go through all his social media, his YouTube channel, his TikToks. It's amazing. There's so much information. But Peter, let's start with your story. How did you, from your type 1 diabetes experience from when you're a kid to eventually how you're doing now and what you're doing now and what difference it is?
Yeah, it's a long story, and I every time that I tell it, I'll focus on some other things.
Yeah,
But I'll
that's
try to
okay.
be brief. It's 16 years now that I have type 1 diabetes, and it started very gradually. Actually, before those 16 years, it took quite a while before I actually got diagnosed. I'm 40 years old now, and when I was 18, 20 years old, I was already very tired at school. They did a lot of testing, and they also tested my blood glucose, which was around 140 in the morning for a young guy. That is quite high.
Yeah.
That was end of the 90s, beginning of this millennium, and that's quite amazing that they just let you go home with a number like this. I mean, I did eat a piece of bread before that measurement, but 114 for a healthy guy, you shouldn't even have that value after eating a little bit of breakfast, I think.
So
And
did they even bring type 2 into the radar? Like they didn't even mention anything. They just said you're good.
yeah, they even didn't think about that. And I mean, I probably was sort of still okay, according
Yeah.
to the rules. And then it took like 10 years, and meanwhile, I've had a colonoscopy somewhere. I had lung photographs at some point. So yeah, the story is more or less that all of the time I had small chronic issues. I mean, I had a very pleasant life. Everything went quite well. I was energetic still, sort of. But yeah, then problems got worse. I got on a gluten-free diet at some point. That helped for several years.
Mm.
And then already I learned about the genetic adjacency of the celiac genes and the type 1 genes. As basically all these autoimmune diseases, they are related.
Hmm.
And back then I always thought like, oh, genetics. So that means that
You're
you're not
broken.
just predisposed, but you're going to get it. And well, okay, for type 1, that was true. But yeah, I think basically it means that you are more sensitive of getting it, more predisposed. And yeah, probably there was a lot of stuff either in my diet or the environment that also triggered this type 1 diabetes. And whether it was the actual diet or a virus or some chemicals, who knows? I don't know. But yeah, then about 16 years ago, I got the diagnosis for type 2 diabetes at the very first few days. So just before Christmas holidays, they sent me home with some metformin. I think it was metformin, and I didn't yet take it. And luckily, I got a phone call while I was already on the train towards Italy for Christmas holidays, and I had to return immediately to the hospital because of risk of ketoacidosis, of course. And
Hmm. Which we will
it
get.
was not that bad, but it was like I think my blood glucose values were like 14, 15, so that is like 250 milligrams per deciliter, something like that.
Yeah.
Uh, Nowadays, if you see, if you look around on TikTok, especially if you see the average diabetic, they will experience those values on a daily basis. So probably I would have been just fine with an insulin pen and a glass of water, but they put me on an infuse of salty liquids and that sort of stuff. And I had to stay for 2 days, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was the start of the diabetes journey. And this number of 14 already gives an idea that was not super high. I mean, it's very high, of course, but for a typical type 1 diagnosis, it's not so high.
Hmm.
Basically, I was still in honeymoon period, I think for, well, 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
Especially the first year, it was already quite exceptional if I would see an 8 or a 9 on my glucose meter.
Okay.
But I measured things very well. I was on a medium to high carb diet, just eating bread, pasta, and all that stuff. But because of the honeymoon phase, everything worked out fine. But then, yeah, year by year, it got worse. You start to accept worse values. And I think probably the first 6 or 7 years went quite okay. And you follow this approach like, oh, I can sort of eat like a normal person and have good blood glucose values. But at some point, it doesn't work anymore. If your pancreas is totally dead, then yeah, you start to suffer from it in daily life. So a good example is that uh, before I switched to the low carb diets, I would typically eat a bowl of oatmeal in the morning. Not very big, but like 40 grams or so. And what happens? Just before work, I eat it. Then I start cycling. The oatmeal is not yet digesting, it stays there in my stomach. I arrive at work, I sit down. Those
Boom.
fibers in the oatmeal, those good fibers, they make actually that then it starts to digest.
Yeah.
Then my sugars rise. It's like 10 o'clock in the morning at work. I get an alert from my CGM. My blood glucose values are at 11, 12. And then I've got to do something. Take insulin, and I would typically take a break, have a short walk, a brisk walk, and then bring my sugars down again. And if I'm lucky, not too much down. Then I
Uh,
start to work again. And let's say the alarm bell for lunch rings. So all the colleagues go for lunch. I have to catch up with work, so I will continue working.
yeah.
So that's just an idea to gives an idea of how your daily patterns are disrupted, and that bothered me a lot. But I think the aspect that bothered me the most was just the unpredictability and the fact that you follow everything, every rule that they tell you. You also do some research also about what could affect your blood glucose levels. You think you do it everything right, and still, like at least once a day, you'll get something, some anomaly that is either a high or a low blood sugar.
No kidding. So okay, so now obviously they're telling you to manage your diabetes. They're telling you to, they're giving you all the things to do. Um, and when did you start realizing that, the glucose roller coasters were not good? And what did you do to kind of
Ooh.
to mitigate that?
Yeah, that they are not good. I think that's, yeah, sort of. I accepted it in the terms of like health outcomes and complications because the thing that you typically hear from doctors is like, well, if your A1C is a 5.5 or a 6, that's very good.
Yeah.
And mine was like below a 6 always.
Hmm.
Well, but that's the tricky part, of course. If it's a roller coaster like this, your A1C, well, my roller coaster, in fact, was nicely symmetrical because I didn't have those peaks like in the 20s. Because somehow, I think even on a high carb diet, if you go to 20, you're doing something wrong.
For
I
sure.
mean, if it goes like this, even after eating a piece of pie,
Yeah.
you've got to inject insulin and keep it like below 12 or
Yeah.
13.
Yeah.
But still, yeah, so I had this symmetrical thing and A1C quite okay. So you think like
So you're doing
health
good.
outcomes will be fine. But yeah, the main thing that bothered me was just it was disrupting all the daily life.
Mm.
And that was about yeah 4 years ago, but it comes very gradually, this realization.
Yeah.
And the first thing that happened actually was that I started cycling.
Mm.
That's about 3 years ago. I started to do a lot of endurance cycling, and that
Okay.
actually helped a lot because, yeah, sorry, if you're on the bike, then the motor is running, and effectively I can eat anything, really anything. Maybe inject a little bit of insulin, but it quickly becomes too much. But just a
Yeah.
little bit, and your sugar values will be just fine.
Mm.
So at some point, I probably did like 300 kilometers of cycling a week on my own mostly. Because
Yeah.
yeah, if you go with others, you have the coffee breaks, and that's very hard to deal with in terms of insulin management. So 300 kilometers a week, and that works fine in summer, in spring, in fall,
Yeah.
but not in winter.
Gets pretty
Uh,
cold
just
pedaling in the
just
snow.
like those coffee breaks,
Mm.
because those coffee breaks, the first thing that you'll see is maybe you know it. Yeah, you probably know it. If you stop exercising, that also happens in healthy people. Your body will dump a lot of the glycogen stores to bring energy to the muscles again. So if I have this coffee break of
Yeah.
half an hour, I will typically, well, on the bike be at 4, 5, 6, or 7.
Yeah.
And it will quickly go to 10, 12,
Wow.
14.
Yeah.
And during such a coffee break, you would have to inject insulin, but of course not too much because in 15 or
You're
20
gonna be
minutes you're going to cycle
yeah.
again. And the same thing is with the seasonal effect, because if it's winter, yeah, you don't exercise anymore, so you'll have to use either more insulin because your sensitivity has weakened.
Yeah.
You also have to eat less, and that takes time to stop eating. If you're stopping with exercising, I think that's a good thing, a good comparison. You see a lot of those professional athletes becoming fat after they stop.
Yeah.
Obese even. I think we had a minister of sports over here. I'm not sure if she had another condition, but she also was quite big. Let's say it
Chunky.
like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of
So
funny how
yeah, that's
all the health ambassadors for our governments are extremely in shape, right? Like in Canada,
yeah.
it's brutal. I'm sure it's kind of fun.
Dietitians the same. At least half of them.
Yeah.
They are not in perfect shape, at the very least. Yeah.
So when you were okay, so now you're starting to figure out sort of how it's working. What led you to, well, first of all, low carb, but then eventually we'll get into how you became carnivore and what the difference is. But so as you're exercising, you're realizing there's something going on here with how blood sugar works, how my body releases sugar. So you're getting that stuff under control. But what led you to low carb? How did you just realize that was a good idea?
Yeah, somehow I already did it on my own without any information, having read any information or so. I would be so upset. And I, of course, realized that after eating bread or anything like that, it would be more difficult to control your blood glucose. And I would just throw away all the bread,
Yeah.
everything, all the carbs from my kitchen cabinet. And I would be 1 or 2 days without any carbs, effectively. So keto, basically. And I knew also that if I skip a meal, that's easy because yeah, it's so obvious, right? You skip a meal. When is diabetes difficult? At the points where you have got to inject insulin and to measure your food. So if you don't do that, everything is solved. And that's, I mean, it's like with the bike riding. A big part of it was the fact that I'm simply not eating, or
Yeah.
I'm consuming basic glucose, which is sort of easier to manage than complicated food.
Mm.
So that's what I did, and but yeah, later on, I think I had a similar episode at some point again, like this, just being totally upset. I mean, there have been moments that I threw like these glucose meters over here. I have thrown a few against the wall. A few of them have really broken. Well, that kind of frustration.
Mhm.
And then I started to look on YouTube again, and the channels that I found in the beginning were actually the low carb down under conferences,
Absolutely.
and that's perfect, right? I mean that's I mean, that's maybe even better to end up there than Dr. Ken Berry or Dr. Berg.
Yeah.
And somehow, yeah, I mean, I probably typed in type 1 diabetes, how to manage, something like this. And I saw a presentation from, I think, Dave Dykman or so. Well, anyway, a bit
I
from
remember that.
the,
I remember that talk. I remember
yeah,
that
it's
talk.
that was a life changer. I mean, a paradigm shift,
Yeah.
just seeing that. And quite quickly, I started doing that. I don't remember the exact course in time, but in a matter of days, probably. And no doubt the name of Dr. Bernstein was mentioned somewhere.
Just
And
to give
yeah,
everybody
yeah.
this, just to say, this book that Peter's talking about, if you're type 1 diabetic, you have to read this. And for all those people that just want to understand insulin a little better and how this all works, this guy. So you is that David Dykman, that talk led you to Richard Bernstein and the book?
I think so. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's because no doubt he mentioned because they learned it from Dr. Bernstein as well. I think
Yeah,
they
he
also
was
were in close contact with him. And there was this type 1 grid community.
yeah,
They act a lot with parents from type 1 diabetic children. And then you see all those glucose graphs, like, well,
yeah,
almost flat lines. I mean, they always zoom out, of course, because type 1s never get flat lines, but
yeah,
just very nice ones. And I started doing that. And if you think about it, a type 1 diabetic is metabolically broken in the sense that the pancreas is not working. But besides that, I mean, okay, there are a few other hormones also affected. But besides that, you are metabolically perfectly healthy generally. If you follow a healthy lifestyle,
yeah,
then that means that if you do the right thing in terms of insulin management and food intake, the results will be virtually immediate. And that's what happened.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
People are always surprised nowadays if I tell it. There's this other channel where I had an interview. It's more focused on type 2 diabetes and then beat diabetes from Dennis Pollock.
yeah,
And he always tells like in a few months or so, you can sort of put your type 2 in diabetes in remission.
for sure.
And I think that's a reasonable time span. But for type 1 diabetes, I mean, you should take a large time span to get used to everything. But I think actually that you could say that if you do the right thing, if you would know it immediately, you can change it from one day to the other.
Yeah,
So it's as simple as that. I mean, you cannot do it because you have to adjust your basal
yeah,
insulin injections, that sort of thing.
of
So there's
course,
a bit of
of course.
gray area, but yeah, and that happened in my case as well. And yeah, that's so powerful
No kidding.
when
And
you see those things happening.
that takeaway from me was that small mistakes make small numbers. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
funny if you can relate that to healthy. You can relate that to just anybody. If you're not going on these big glucose excursions, even if you're not diabetic, look at your,
uh,
and that's where that really hit home for me. I mean, I'd already read that book before that talk, but I remember that talk. It was a kid, it was an athlete, and he was like saying, listen, like it's possible to just get a hold of this and thrive, not just, not just manage your diabetes. And, this is why it's so important to hear stuff, when you're putting it together. So we'll get back into a little bit more about some complications with type 1, but when did you go carnivore? Like when did you switch to an animal based?
yeah. That was like half a year later. And by the way, yeah, you mentioned the small numbers, but that's just a nice thing to mention about this Dave Dykman story. A lot of other things, they are big numbers, right? This guy is sporting a lot and he's eating a lot of meat.
Yeah,
So in terms of calories, it's big, but
yeah,
the right things like carbs and insulin, those numbers are small.
yeah,
They are difficult to control. So but yeah, yeah, that's I stayed on this Bernstein protocol, and then
yeah,
yeah, I thought let's go a step further. Bernstein is like 30 grams of carbs per day.
yeah,
I started to reduce it a little bit more so that I was keto, I think. Probably that's officially 20 grams, but yeah, I reduced it a little bit. And I remember that I did a lot of walking.
yeah,
That was just perfect because also for type 1 diabetes, even on a keto diet, it's a really good thing. I did a lot of walks to the local farm, and I would buy a lot of vegetables
Okay.
and eggs and cheese. And so it was also meat heavy keto, but a lot of vegetables as well.
Yep.
The Dr. Burke approach.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I love Dr. Burke.
I
So
do
it
too,
was,
man. Like, that
it's,
guy is, he comes up with these videos sometimes. It just makes so much sense. And I mean,
yeah,
that's well, just not to get too sidetracked here, but that's what I kind of look at is all these people that, for one, they understand the value of meat. It's they might not be
yeah,
full
yeah.
carnivore, but they're all not opposed to it. You know what I mean? And that's where, a lot of we can get into the weeds a little bit with that, but I love Dr. Burke too. But
Yeah,
yes,
go 60-70% meat. That's the main thing. And then you talk about autoimmune issues and that sort of stuff. That yeah, then you get at the requirement for carnivore, I think. And
yeah,
that's
yeah, for sure.
yeah, to stick to the story, that's what happened with me as well. That's maybe not so much autoimmune, a little bit, but I think it was mainly the oxalates in all the vegetables. Also, before going on this keto, I ate a lot of nuts, almonds. I would easily eat an entire jar of peanut butter on a day. In terms of energy intake, that was possible because I was doing a lot of cycling. But yeah, that stuff that it caused all kinds of symptoms, like I think probably also pain in the joints. But the main symptoms were like cloudy urine at some point,
Yeah.
blood in the urine, and even brown urine at some point.
Okay.
And the brown urine that happens when your muscles are broken down at a too rapid rate in
Okay.
the rhabdomyolysis.
Oh, yeah.
And well, now I know all these things.
Yeah.
Now I also realize that cloudy urine and blood in the urine can come from oxalates. But back then that was quite scary because as a type 1 diabetic,
Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
one thing that you maybe fear the most is the kidneys.
Yeah. No kidding. And when we see these things, like a lot of times, like, when I'm helping people or when I'm teaching people things, is you are your best metric. Like when it's nice to see that like these things happen and then you want to know why. And then
Yeah,
when you start to learn why, things start to click. And what's good for you might not be good for me, but in generally, a good solid framework of real food usually shows these things and presents them, you know? So okay, so now you're eating, you're sort of you're cut. Did you cut out those nuts and things, and you went to all meat? And how did you feel
yeah,
about
very gradually actually, because I was first thinking like, okay, the typical story that you hear about kidney stones and
that?
uric acid comes from meat and
Mhm.
fish, pork probably the most. But yeah, so I started to look for those ingredients as well, but I didn't find a real pattern. The only thing that I noticed was that after eating, it would happen. But yeah, all
Yeah,
those foods contained like spinach or something like it, soy sauce or whatever.
yeah,
And yeah, gradually I started to cut those out. To the point that at Christmas dinner back then, I already only had some carrots and a few pieces of cucumber, an avocado here and there. And then at some point, yeah, that's what you typically see when people are adding so little vegetables to their diet. Then I mean, you have to realize at some point, like, ooh, all that vitamin content in those vegetables. That's very important. But I'm only eating like two carrots.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm not getting my vitamins from that anyway.
yeah,
And you realize that you can cut it out. That sort of realization I had back then. And it was really not like from one day to the other.
yeah,
It's not like I read about carnivore and I thought like,
mm,
yeah, I should maybe do that.
yeah,
Actually, the only way that uh, the way that I first got to know carnivore, besides the funny movies that you see on television from those raw liver eating people, that was the autoimmune aspect.
yeah,
That like this autoimmune protocol, I think they call it,
mhm,
and that really hit me, and that made sense for type 1 diabetics. So I think also Dave Dikeman talked about it,
yeah,
that he wanted to try it, something like this. Um, yeah, so I also had in the back of my mind, I have to try it at some point when things have calmed down,
yeah.
say in half a year or so, and effectively I did. Yeah, it's
And that's kind of the magical thing is like we have all these. misconceptions, if you want to call them lies, whatever. That we've been told all our lives, eat your vegetables, are good for you,
Yeah.
and it's just if you can take yourself out of that whole picture and just say, okay, are they though? You don't have to, figure it out for everybody's going to have their own little tweaks and things, but what foods are bringing what to the table and
Yeah.
what foods really aren't. And like that's amazing how you just started by process of elimination, getting back to what your body needs. And do you ever play around with it? Do you ever bring things back in to see how you do? Or
I've done it a little bit, and in summer I still do like, and especially during cycling, that actually helped me in the beginning. I didn't go cycling in a fasted state immediately, and I also brought one or two bananas the first half year
yeah,
or so. But yeah, then you're talking about like I don't know, 200 calories
yeah,
of a banana. No, banana, I don't know, but anyway, it's like nothing compared to what you're spending in energy.
yeah,
And of course, I have to bring the glucose anyway.
yes.
That's although I hardly ever need it,
That's
but
that's
yeah, yeah. With sports, there, I think that's the common place where you would add it in sometimes. But although it's not necessary, I mean, it
yeah.
can be convenient maybe.
So getting back to the type 1 diabetes, there is a whole lot of bullshit out there. I see it all the time with people, with doctors, with these channels that are saying, you know, it's okay for this, it's okay. How do you feel about that when you see these people that are just they're regurgitating the American diabetes bullshit? And how do you feel about that when you see somebody saying wrong information? Because it's got to feel pretty awkward.
Yeah, I think the common thing that type 1 diabetics on social media have, and in general probably as well, is that they get offended when people tell them that when they ask them, "Can you eat that?"
Yeah.
And then, of course, they immediately want to show that, yes, I can eat it. So they're going to shove down a donut and inject insulin for it. And I am actually the opposite now. I mean, I never felt like this anyway, but
Yeah.
when I hear these things, the immediate question that I ask is like, well, should I eat it? Should I even want to eat it?
Yeah.
And to those people asking me the question,
Hmm.
they should ask themselves, like, can I eat it? Should I
Yes.
eat it as a healthy person? That's one thing. But yeah, that now it makes me angry actually that type 1 diabetics are acting so sensitively.
Okay.
I call it diabetes wokeness, basically. Which
Yes.
I really dislike it. Then they start to be activistic against things like keto and low carb, because yeah,
Yeah.
that's what some of those people, unknowing people, will tell to type 1 diabetics, like, oh, you go low carb, that will solve your disease. Well, it won't solve it, of course, but
Yeah.
it's still very good to do it. And that's so unfortunate that yeah, this
Yeah.
aversion is created.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, anyway, this type of anger, I get it now when I see other misconceptions like, oh, keto should be dangerous for type 1 diabetics. And when you think about it, well, the common thing, of course, is that being on a keto diet, they would suggest that you end up in ketoacidosis more easily.
Yes.
But
I was actually
as
just
long
gonna
as,
I was just gonna ask you about that because a lot
yeah,
a lot of stigmas out there where, and it even bleeds into the just nutritional ketosis. Like people get, oh, I'll get ketoacidosis. Now,
yeah,
for everybody that is wondering what this is or not sure about it, can you explain it? Especially coming from your perspective
yeah.
and
So
why it's
keto,
different, why it matters more for you than it would for a normal um blood sugar controlled person.
yeah, there happen a lot of things during ketoacidosis that your blood glucose levels will rise typically.
Yeah.
You'll be dehydrated. Your ketones go up way higher than in normal ketosis, even higher than the ketosis that you have when you're fasting or exercising. Your salt balance will go totally out of whack because there is no insulin. That's the main driver behind this whole process, the fact that there is no insulin present. So your salt balance will be totally wrong. All the potassium, I think, will be either pushed inside or outside the cells, something like
Okay.
this.
Yeah.
What they typically have to do when you end up in ketoacidosis, they've got to lower your blood acidity again, control it. So uh, hydrate.
Yeah.
They will give you potassium and a lot of insulin and sugar
Yeah.
to, yeah, so I think that's the thing, to drive back the potassium in the cells again. And this doesn't happen in ketosis because, yeah, that's with the same thing like blaming the ketones for something which they aren't causing. I mean, they are part of the mechanism, but
Yeah.
that's the same story for the blood glucose. You cannot blame the blood glucose itself
Yeah.
for the diabetes. I mean, it's the
Yes.
food that's coming in. And that's we hear it's just the same. And yeah, I think it's important to realize that there is a lot happening. So I also don't fully understand diabetic ketoacidosis. There are those two guys, keto guys from the UK, I think Richard Smith and Stephen something.
Okay.
They talked about this as well in very much detail. I like this video very much.
Yeah.
But yeah, where did I want to go? Forgot. But
Have you ever had ketoacidosis? You personally?
no, no, yeah, not even a diagnosis.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can briefly touch upon that as well. Yeah, that's horrible. When you see people using insulin pumps, especially,
Mm.
there you get a lot of risk of diabetic ketoacidosis, because you have to
Okay.
just be aware of whether there is insulin in your blood or not.
Mm.
And if you're using a pump, you're relying on fast-acting insulin. And if there's something wrong with your pump in a matter of 1, 2 hours, you can be without insulin. So yeah,
Okay.
that's. I mean, it's a personal preference, but I very much like to use this long-acting insulin that you inject once a day.
Hmm.
And basically, if you do that, it's not a total guarantee, but I mean, you have to use your common sense.
Yeah.
But basically, you cannot end up in diabetic ketoacidosis. And I think that's just the funny thing that people talk about keto diet being more risky.
Yeah.
But the fact that I am using low amounts of insulin and low amounts of carbs, if anything goes wrong, I will actually notice it immediately because if there is a rise in blood glucose of a few millimoles, for me that would be quite unusual. I would start thinking what's happening.
Yeah.
Whereas those people that still have a 14, 15, 20 millimoles every day, yeah, for them it's just business as usual that their blood glucose is suddenly doubling.
Yeah.
And I mean, at those levels, commonly they don't even measure ketones.
Yeah.
So that's just amazing.
So,
I mean, I'm talking like this as if obviously it's not the mistake of those people, but it's just yeah,
well, yeah,
the
it's there's like this big giant thing about here is this like if you just take these things for what they are and realize how it happens and why it potentially could happen, and you start reverse engineering it. And I mean, I see a lot of people. The problem is they get indoctrinated with bullshit, and then
yeah.
they assume that's the truth. When realistically, people like yourself are living it, and it makes so much sense to me because you're concerned about your health, you're concerned about something that's happening to you, and you're really managing it, not their way of managing it. And that's why people need to hear your story because like it's possible and you can thrive. Because I mean, you look like you're in great shape, you look like you're a healthy guy, and you're doing
Yeah, and I
everything.
could be better actually. I've been ill for several days, but but
But you're
thanks
look
anyway. Yeah.
you're doing things that they say you can't do,
Hmm.
flat out. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah, that's another myth that fasting is difficult on type 1 diabetes.
yeah.
Well, at some point, well, let's not go too much in the story, but I read this research paper about how they could possibly reverse type 1 diabetes in mice.
Mhm.
And they did this with the fasting mimicking diet.
Okay.
And well, obviously, this type of experiment, they cannot readily do this in humans. So it probably takes another 10, 20 years before they will start doing it.
Yeah.
So I personally decided to do this myself. I thought like, well, I'm obligated to myself to at least try it. I mean, I was not hopeful either, right? I mean, it's just would be quite amazing. But yeah, I did this fasting mimicking scheme, and that entailed a fast of 5 days,
Yeah.
then refeeding and repeating the process several times. And well, it was hard sometimes, but I mean, a 5 days fast, of course, is hard. But it was not harder because of the type 1 diabetes. In fact, for me, it was maybe easier because I constantly realize how liberated I feel from not having to inject insulin. I mean, I still have to inject basal insulin, but
Yeah.
not to inject for meals and to think about it. I
You're
mean,
not chasing the bolus, so to speak.
yeah, yeah, I mean, you get this keto high basically that also healthy
Yeah.
people get,
Yeah.
plus all the liberation from your diabetes, and yeah, the same holds for fasted cycling.
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of fasted cycling, and well, that I would do typically one day.
Yeah.
But I've also done low carb cycling, and I mean that's uh, two aspects. I mean, the low carb aspect for cycling is already questioned for healthy people, like, oh, you have to carb load the evening
Well, it's,
before.
that's one myth we can put to bed right here because I mean, you need carbohydrates to exercise, man. You need them. You can't do exercise. I had somebody tell me one time that you can't train without carbohydrates. I was like, well, I am, and I have been, and I'm lifting some heavy weight for like proportionate to me, and I'm not feeling a difference. And I'll even go out of my way and say that doesn't mean that maybe trying carbohydrates might be better. I don't know, but I don't need them, and that's the
Now
point.
and
I
I'll
don't
tell you
need
why.
them.
I'll tell you why, and you can put the label on it. But
Yeah.
when I start doing weight exercising, my glucose goes from like 4 millimoles all the way up to 10 millimoles, and
No
that's
doubt.
not because I'm not injecting insulin.
Yeah. Well, that's
That's
it.
just
When we deal with anaerobic exercise, where does that sugar come from, right? Like, it has to come from somewhere. That actually leads me into a question about the dawn phenomenon, because a lot of people don't realize it, or they hear about it and they freak out because this is when the
yeah.
glucose goes up, and it's like, I tested my like when I was pre-diabetic, I got glucose monitor, just a prick one. And I was testing my blood glucose every morning and I was freaking out because it's up to 6.2, 6.3. And I'm like, what the hell's
Wow, yeah.
going on? I've got this. My blood sugar's not coming down. Then I'd be fasted. And then later on, my blood sugar's at 5.5 or 5 actually just on the button. And I'm like, how is this working? What's going on? So can you explain a little bit about the dawn phenomenon and what that is and how maybe it's different for you?
Yeah, so there might be a small difference because, yeah, we talked about insulin. I mean, we don't produce insulin, but there's more happening with the beta cells. So
Yeah,
there is something a little bit off also in the whole balance between glucagon, insulin, and some of the other hormones. But in principle, for the rest, it's the same as in your body. Yeah, in the
yeah,
morning. And recently, I experienced it again because sometimes it's also not there that much. But
yeah,
nowadays, my blood glucose starts at 4. But
yeah.
if I don't inject, it goes to 7, 8.
Okay.
And yeah, I will typically take a unit or so of insulin for it. The reason for it is, of course, that yeah, if you put your feet on the ground, then your body is activated. And the same thing as after your heavy exercising, your body just dumps some of the glycogen in your bloodstream. And yeah, that's perfectly fine. And that has been difficult as a type 1 diabetic as well to accept these values because, yeah, I see everything on the CGM.
Yeah,
And I also notice the fact that I have to inject insulin. So even if I manage to keep those blood glucose values stable, I sort of feel like, oh, am I injecting insulin again? I mean, it
yeah,
feels you emotionally you can quite quickly start to think that you're metabolically not healthy when you again have to do an insulin shot. Whereas, yeah, in the end, it's perfectly normal that you have some days where you, like an average healthy person has like 30 units of insulin per day
yeah,
as requirements. So your pancreas will produce it. And that's the same for me, a little bit more sometimes because those insulin injections are slightly less efficient there because I inject here in the skin,
Yeah,
whereas the pancreas, yeah, it's in the center of the body, so that's just much quicker,
yeah,
much less loss of insulin as well. But yeah, as long as you stay in that range of also for healthy people, of like say 20, 30, maybe even 35 units of insulin, then that's quite natural variation, I think. I mean, I'm saying this as a layman, but that's sort
yeah.
of
Hey,
what I
that's
read.
right. Like, I mean, there's like there's a great book that I read. It was Metabolical by Dr. Robert Lustig. He's done a lot of
Yeah, yeah,
with fructose and the liver and obesity in kids and all this stuff. And he actually goes out of his way to say he's dietary agnostic. He's like, I don't follow any like preach any diet, but what he does say is keep the insulin down. The
yeah,
better you keep that insulin down or more consistent, the better you are. And, coming from a type 1 diabetic, it sounds to me that you have to be a little bit more obviously on the ball about it, but it's pretty much the same thing. Like
yeah,
too much insulin, you're in trouble. Too much insulin in your blood, you're in trouble. Too high fasting insulin, if anybody thinks that they're eating, 6, 7, 8 times a day, constantly bumping their blood sugar up. And for all those, people that don't realize there's 4 grams, I think, of glucose in our blood at all times.
yeah, yeah.
Anything above that, you are theoretically, you need to get it out of your blood. So, then the
Yeah,
insulin.
and that's the funny thing about insulin, right? Your body prioritizes reducing the blood glucose levels in your bloodstream because that's the most critical. That's you can just die from it, just like ketoacidosis.
Yeah,
And yeah, what happens in type 2 diabetes is that your body prioritizes this, so it starts to ramp up insulin production. But insulin is doing a lot more in your body than just blood glucose regulation. It's also in the kidneys and the womb and that sort
yeah,
of things, the female hormone production probably,
yeah,
PCOS and that sort of things. And I'm not sure if I'm totally correct, but this is the concept that I understood that, yeah, if those insulin levels are elevated, hyperinsulinemia,
yeah,
then obviously, yeah, your blood glucose will be maybe even fine if you're early on type 2 diabetic, but your PCOS and all those other processes will be ramped up.
yeah,
And yeah, that's also a thing that I still fear a little bit to a much smaller degree as a type 1 diabetic, but I'm injecting insulin and my only control variable is the blood glucose levels that I can see on my CGM.
yeah,
And no doubt, I am not injecting the exact right amount of insulin, besides the fact that I'm injecting it here in the skin, also at a
yeah,
different
yeah.
place. But that's so, yeah, it's
So,
still the best that you can do, let's say.
yeah, so theoretically, just when I try and teach people like about insulin, I like to tell like this is very layman. I've listened to Dr. Ben Bickman until that guy's he's probably saved my life a few times. Um,
Hmm.
but insulin, if you could imagine, is like the master commander hormone. So it's doing its job until it isn't. But what that's doing to all the other hormonal cascade is it's basically like a stop sign. It's like saying, guys, we got to deal with this first. I'm here. You can't be here, or you're not
Yeah,
going to work
yeah,
properly until I'm gone. And it's amazing how when we tie this into type 1 diabetes, how you just said it like beautifully. It's a best guess, and you're playing a numbers game. You're trying to keep
yeah,
it sort of regular. And what I've found with, this makes sense to me. I don't know if it does to you, but type 1 diabetics with with a loose system or a bad management can actually turn into type 2 diabetics because they become insulin resistant and they're just
oh yeah, definitely,
constantly,
yeah,
constantly putting in the insulin. And the type 2 diabetics, because of all the insulin, their pancreas burns out. They can become type 1 diabetics.
yeah, effectively, yes, yeah, yeah, that's true. And
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 I mean,
and
I mean
luckily they can
that's
mostly reverse it. Also the pancreatic damage, but still, yeah, it's totally true. You get this. actually what they early on called type 3 diabetes. And nowadays, some people use it for Alzheimer's, but
Yeah.
yeah, the double whammy.
Yeah.
And I also noticed it after stopping cycling in the winter. I continue eating, and I can just see my insulin sensitivity going down. And
Yeah.
it has nothing to do with
Yeah. Yeah.
pre-diabetes yet, but yeah, it's there. Yeah,
No doubt. Like insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance, and the thing I think a lot of people do is they just get lost in this. Oh, I have this, and
yeah,
quite often just simplifying things. And I think that's what you've done too. If you can, if I'm correct here, is that once you just break it down to what your body needs, and then you adjust accordingly, whether you're a type 1 diabetic or you're just like, for my instance, a reversed pre-diabetic, it's kind of all the same way when you actually strip out all the stuff. And that's where, so how much, what's a typical day of eating for you?
um, okay, let's take yesterday then, because today was a bit weird one.
Yeah.
But yeah, recently I start with coffee with butter, also with loose butter. Yeah, I just had another one just before this talk actually, but yeah, sort of to continue my fasting from the night and extend it until end of the morning, start of the afternoon. And the last half year or so, I started eating a lot of raw meat as well. I'm not
Yeah.
fully raw meat, like 50%.
Yeah.
And since I started doing that, I'm also not doing that much endurance exercise, so that might play a role, but I tend towards one meal a day.
Okay.
And it's about 700 grams. Yeah, so 2 pounds of meat maybe.
Sounds good. Yeah.
And a lot of butter. I
Yeah.
think right now I'm easily at 2 sticks of butter per day, and
Oh,
that's quite unusual for me as well. But yeah, so
and just because we got to say this, how does that affect your blood sugar?
yeah, that's well, meat is difficult to manage,
Okay.
but it doesn't affect my blood sugar much. If I
Okay.
wouldn't inject insulin, obviously I would still go to hyperglycemic range.
Yeah.
But over a period of 3 to 6 hours, I inject for this meal about 4 units, 5 units of insulin.
Okay.
Maybe I have a correction for Down phenomenon in the morning.
Yeah.
So 6, 7, 8 units of meal and correction boluses plus about 12, 13 of basal insulin that
Yeah.
covers my daily needs.
Yeah.
And I'm at, yeah, typically 25 right now, I think, per
Okay.
day. And yeah, those protein meals. The nice thing about it is that you can act afterwards, basically. Yeah. So what some people with diabetes do, they eat a piece of pie, they look at their glucose monitor, and then when it reaches like 10 or more hyperglycemic range, they start to inject insulin.
Yeah.
Uh, Not a good approach,
No.
but with carnivore, I can do this.
Yeah.
I can eat and 1 hour later look at my CGM and see like, oh, it went from a 4 to a 6. Maybe it's time to inject a little bit of extra insulin.
Okay.
And that's my approach right now. It's like
Yeah.
very easygoing, intuitive
So I want
management,
to I
actually.
want to switch gears and I want to get your opinion on this because it's clear to me that you need glucose. We must have it. It's our primary fuel source, and
Yeah.
without it, we can't function. So let's dig into, a little bit of gluconeogenesis, and for all the people that means, creating glucose from new, and our bodies can, manage quite
Now I
easily
love
without it.
gluconeogenesis.
So yeah, how do you find that, and what's let's bust some myths here. So coming
Yeah.
from a type 1
Well,
diabetic.
that's maybe just before we start, well, a nice thing to mention and just to put nuance in it. The very beginning, when I started carnivore, my blood glucose management was actually slightly more difficult than on the keto diet.
Mm.
So when you go low carb, Bernstein protocol and keto, they are more or less the same.
Yeah.
You basically get perfect blood glucose for type 1, the best
Okay.
you can get.
Yeah.
And when I started the carnivore diet, well, you'll be a little bit less in ketosis typically, and you'll be eating a little bit more protein. And that in the beginning, that is more difficult as a type 1 diabetic because, yeah, then we get to this gluconeogenesis as well that is playing a larger role, and you have to get used to it because
Hmm.
now suddenly 3 to 6 hours after a meal, there is a little bit more insulin requirement than on the keto diet. And
Okay.
that's perfectly fine. But yeah, it's from a blood glucose management perspective, actually carnivore for a type 1 diabetic, that's important to mention that detail.
Yeah.
It's slightly worse. It's
Yeah.
still very, very good,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
slightly worse.
Because
But
like
yeah, yeah,
if
yeah,
you're
go ahead.
if you're from the like the school of Bart K, you'll understand that like eating one meal a day, and this because this is coming from a type one guy. This is coming from a type one diabetic that feels this, that knows this, that has to manage this very tightly. But for all of us, keto freaks that are chasing ketones, and you're wondering why, if you eat one meal a day on a carnivore diet, you're getting kicked right out of ketosis. That's natural. That's actually
Yeah.
what's happening is, the gluconeogenesis, whatever you want to call it, the glucose, you go out of ketosis for a time. And I think in my honest opinion, these are natural processes that
Yeah.
we overthink, like we're chasing numbers. When you're type 1 diabetic, you need to know this stuff. Like this is real. It's really happening. Gluconeogenesis is a thing. And if you're worried about your blood sugar, these are things that we talk about. So typically,
Mm.
do you does the amount of meat you eat obviously affects the amount of gluconeogenesis that happens? And do you ever do you sort of have that like in a
Yeah.
ballpark, or are you pretty much?
It's difficult. Yeah. I never tested it very accurately because, yeah, part of the proteins, no doubt, must be used as building material.
Yeah,
But yeah, I have to make the calculation in my head now. But for sure, it's just a small part of what I'm actually eating. So
yeah,
there will be a significant amount. I mean, and that's no problem. Some people tell that gluconeogenesis from protein is bad if it happens too much, but at least a part of the meat will be converted to glucose,
yeah,
even if it's complete protein.
yeah.
And yeah, so it does matter how much meat I eat. I actually, if I already eat one egg, and I no doubt have to inject a little bit of insulin for it.
Okay.
So it's not like 100% suddenly becomes used as building material.
Yeah,
That's funny, actually. Yeah, it's uh, because yeah, I think a lot of people would think that it's like it's sort of like you first use all the protein as building material, and then
yeah,
at some point gluconeogenesis starts.
yeah.
But
Well, I think, like what I found too is like a lot of these things that we talk about happen at the same time. Like we're looking
yeah,
at like
yeah,
this is going on, this is going on. And when you get into like the cell biology and the physiology, there's a lot of things going on at the same time, and a lot of mechanisms are working. And like,
yeah.
if you just look, it's really impressive how you've come to this way of finding your own way and
Yeah, but, just to give
realizing,
an example, by the way, of that everything happens together. Yeah, that this one big meal kicks you out of ketosis, but that doesn't mean that at that point your ketone levels are zero even,
yeah,
because I'm injecting insulin. But if I measure it and well, let's say that I do that quite often still. I mean, I'm just curious.
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
have to measure it, but I could easily be after a big meal also at 1 millimoles per liter for ketones. And yeah, that's just because there were probably still a lot of ketones in my blood before I
yeah,
started eating.
yeah.
But yeah, those things happen together. Yeah,
And I mean, I like that you said that you're curious, because that's where I started. I started counting calories. I started counting my ketones, counting my blood sugar. Like, I mean, did I really have to? Now that looking back on it, um, I just wanted to know what was going
yeah,
on, and it was wild when I found these anomalies, and it was like, what's this going on? I thought if I was this, I couldn't be in this, and if I'm fasting, the ketone levels would be skyrocketing. And what I started realizing is that when we're testing this stuff, if you're testing your urine or you're testing your keto mojo,
yeah, especially your urine. Yeah, yeah, that's
these are spillovers as well. It's like, it's just because they're there doesn't mean you're using them. And it starts to get really, really complicated, because it's like, we're chasing numbers. And I mean, in your situation, of course, you have to be on the ball with, especially with blood sugar. But it's
Yeah.
people get a little bit, I think they get confused because they're always, we see it on social media, people that are telling their stories that they're chasing these, do I need to track my ketones? And it's like, you want to be in ketosis, just that number being in nutritional ketosis is probably good enough, whether it's, zero point 0.5 or 2.5. How well your
Mm.
body's using the ketones would probably matter more. So do you feel the difference when you're in ketosis?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I can sort of feel when I'm really low on ketones. Yeah,
Okay.
now it sounds almost like that's a problem, but when I measure my ketones and they are like at zero point 0.1 or zero point 0.2, I've never seen a zero, by the way, since going on low carb. But I
Yeah.
also never measured it before.
Yeah.
But yeah, at those moments when it's in those ranges, I typically make a right prediction before measuring. So
Mhm.
I sort of, I mean, I feel perfectly fine, but I can distinguish it very easily from this. Yeah, what is it? I'm also not saying that I'm not mentally clear
Yeah. No, I hear
at
you.
this point, but there is some difference.
Yeah, because like what I find now is, and I think like, how long have you been doing this now? Like 3 years, you said? Yeah.
Yeah, 2 years. Yeah,
2 years. I find when you start getting into your sort of consistent groove, your routine, whatever it is, you find your diet that works for you, you're feeling good, the measurement of feeling good. So that's my cat. You don't think that there's a ghost coming in. You start feeling good, and then you start to feel these subtle differences in the way you feel. And it's not to say you're feeling bad, you just recognize these little
yeah,
subtleties.
yeah,
And that I think is so important to people to understand, that to stick with this plan and start to figure out how your body
yeah.
works. If you
In
eat,
fact, actually, here I feel equally good on those two states.
yeah.
And that's yeah.
And do you ever experiment with the vegetables, or do you ever try and bring things back in and try and just see how you feel?
Yeah, very little. I've tried dairy.
Yeah.
I mean, I eat cheese anyway. The
Yeah.
cheese is yeah. The only problem is that you hear a lot there that too much constipates. But besides that, yeah, I eat cheese. But I tried to add in milk, raw milk,
Yeah.
yogurt, and that sort of things, and that goes well for 1 or 2 times, and then at some point it always gives a little bit of troubles.
Yeah.
Uh, some fruit like berries, I've tried it,
Yeah.
but I don't do that anymore, basically.
Yeah.
No.
How and that's kind of where I'm at too. Like I tell people flat, if I had land and I had a garden, I would eat the vegetables. I would plant vegetables. I would try them. I would see what was going on. I would eat seasonal,
Yeah.
but I don't do just the cool thing about the way you and I both eat is it's on our terms. I feel great, and why mess with it? You know what I mean? It's just like I just don't,
Yeah.
money, simplicity, and how you're sort of finding your own way of doing things it matters, and that's
Yeah.
really cool. Now I
Yeah,
gotta
eggs the
ask,
same, by the way. Yeah, that's
what's that?
with eggs it's the same. I reduced it to a very minimum level, actually.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
what's funny with eggs with me, I do, when I get good quality farmed eggs, because we got like local farms here, and I try and do
mhm.
it as much as I can. And I find I feel better. I like steak and eggs for me is my, just like, I could eat that every day and I feel the best when I eat steak and eggs. There's, you know, it's just me. And I always try, and I'll do lion diet for 7 days just for convenience. I'll bring in fish. So actually, do you ever do you eat seafood?
A little, yeah. So mostly canned sardines, that sort of things,
Okay.
and smoked salmon as well. That one is fresh then, yeah, or
Do you
fresh, yeah.
do you do you find that sometimes you just, like, you gravitate towards it? Because I don't eat a lot of seafood, but
Mm.
sometimes I just feel like it's time. Like it's weird, almost like an extra sense. I just go to and I need fish.
Yeah, maybe with the smoked salmon, but I have it with other foods. Definitely with liver, I tend to have it, and
Yeah.
cheese as well. Somehow,
Well, there's
Yeah,
so many good
yeah.
things in those things, like special. Like I do, like I don't know. I like my liver raw. I can't stand cooked liver. I can't do
Yeah,
it.
no, no, me neither. It's I just deep fry it for 30
Yeah,
seconds.
you're saying I love that.
That's yeah.
Now let's go a different direction here. So I just want to find out because I don't want to take up all your evening, but
No,
how
that's fine.
how's the farmers in your country right now? How's the food awareness? Like what's going on like in the political geopolitical space? I don't want to get too much into politics, but just I'm a big believer in eating local, seasonal, and meat Canada. It's just ridiculous what's going on with our food system. But how is that in
Yeah.
Holland?
Yeah. You asked about the farmers as well. Did I get
Yeah,
that right? Or yeah, so that's still an ongoing process. So that's maybe in a way a good thing that it's a lot of political difficulties. So not so much is happening. It's just dragging along. Yeah, it's tendency hasn't changed there. So they the common narrative is that need to have less farms. Um, there are also people saying that we have to go to organic agriculture and that sort of thing. So yeah, okay, I agree with that. But yeah, it's well, this story, yeah, it's dragging along,
yeah,
and
probably
yeah,
the same,
meanwhile, that's
kind of the same everywhere, I guess, right? I just want to because
yeah,
a lot of people didn't know that Holland was having a like your farmers were pretty upset.
yeah,
I know it's like, now it's happening all throughout Europe and people just it's not in the mainstream media. And I mean, I'm a firm believer in eating local and seasonal and regenerative agriculture, all that stuff that comes along with the way we eat. People think that I'm against veganism, and I don't care. If you're feeling good eating a diet that's natural and whole food, so be it, but don't preach
yeah,
it.
yeah.
I don't agree with. That leads me to my next question for you. How much blowback do you get from your content online? Do you get much hate?
Yeah, that's funny. I heard you and Mark talk about this, and but if I effectively look at how many messages, I mean, obviously a small channel, so I don't get too many messages anyway. But yeah, there's the occasional guy that thinks that vegan diet is the best, and once in a while there's also a person saying something like, "Oh, you're going to die in a few years from a heart attack," that sort of
Yeah.
stuff. But really, real aggression, not so much. And I get the impression that TikTok actually does quite a good job at filtering out things, yeah, because sometimes if I even mention a word that looks a little bit like a curse or so, it's filtered out.
Yeah,
Uh,
I've noticed that too. It's like some things that's like, what? That comment didn't get approved
yeah, yeah.
because, but yeah, that's a good point. That's really good. Um,
But yeah, it's like the atmosphere is like this. So especially in the Netherlands, probably it's a bit like in Germany. They are really minded towards this organic food and the plants and all these things. And at the same time, Dutch people are very down to earth,
yeah.
and that can be a good thing. But on the other hand, there's also this concept of like, well, don't worry too much because it's going to stress you out. Just
Oh,
eat what you want or eat like a
welcome
balanced diet. Just be down to earth. Don't do crazy stuff. Don't think
Welcome to
about
the
it too
Canadian
much.
attitude, man. That's the Canadian attitude. That's the Canadian way. Oh,
Yeah,
man, it'll be all good. Well, I'll tell you what, it's not good. And
yeah,
like the censorship that's gone on, just I've witnessed this with social media, especially from my standpoint. It's crazy. It's just, and our way of sort of eating and our ideas about it aren't very well, I'm not going to say accepted from the normal people, but it's the content.
yeah,
That's actually why I went on TikTok, was because YouTube I was doing great. It was awesome. And then it just went, stopped. So that's my next question for you is so people are they aware in the Netherlands about carnivore, keto? What's the sort of the
yeah.
main sort of zeitgeist, if you will, about how the general population is feeling about this?
Ooh, if I would have to put a percentage on it, I don't know, but uh, my feeling says that like I don't know, 10-20% of people even just know about carnivore. And a little bit more of people know about keto. And then, yeah, I've recently seen a television show. There was a guy talking about that he tried keto and then he stopped after 2 or 3 weeks
Yeah.
because his health went in the wrong direction. And then they talk about like, okay, I measured my LDL and it
Yeah.
was way too high. And that was
Yeah.
the reason to stop. And all these type of narratives, they are commonplace in the Netherlands. So yeah, eating a lot of vegetables. And they are talking about, well, they have introduced some form of sugar tax, but now they are talking about sort of fast food and fat tax and reducing oh, what's this? Well, the tax, the the
Yeah.
VAT on vegetables and fruit.
Yeah. Jesus.
And yeah, things like saturated fat, they are still
Ooh,
not encouraged.
yeah.
Cholesterol in your food, that's of course already that myth has already been busted, but for like 5 or 10 years, and
Yeah.
that's
Nobody.
still
Yeah. I love
dietitian. Oh,
those.
that's even worse. Cancer dietitians
Oh,
claiming that sugar is not a problem.
wow. I know.
Really amazing. So,
That's
that
where
sort of stuff. Yeah.
that's where it's really important for guys like you to tell your story, to keep hammering it home, because you know I it's that's the biggest thing that upsets me, is that it's not rocket science. This is logic.
Mm.
And all these arguments about, look at the way things are, look at our health, look, every country is affected by it, everybody's suffering, and they're medicated, and they're blaming you for being broken. And if
Yeah.
anything can be taken away from today, not only are you not broken, but you're actually thriving on a situation that most people would look at as a, you know, an existential diagnosis that, it doesn't get better from here.
Yeah. Oh, and the thing that they are really bad at here in the Netherlands is to mix the two subjects of environment
Oh
and
yeah.
health. Oh, it's such a coincidence, right? That the
Yeah.
plant foods, they are both healthy and good for the environment.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
so it's on
It's not.
several occasions that I tell them like it's an inconvenient truth, but yeah, it's an inconvenient truth that eating meat is good for our health.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not saying that producing meat is environmentally better, because honestly, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I do know that the story isn't as obvious as
No,
they present it,
exactly.
but it could be an inconvenient truth. I mean, if it's an inconvenient truth, we have to accept it, and we
Exactly.
cannot simply say like, oh, we are going to continue on survival food, basically.
Yeah. And growing our lab meat and bullshit. Like,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
just, I mean, when I'm assuming you have to, well, I've seen your videos too, but you have to read ingredients. If you were going to buy anything, you need to know what's in it, for sure, from
yeah,
your
yeah.
aspect. That's actually a good question. And then once we get into this, I won't take any up more of your time, but this is important. Okay, in processed foods, I don't know what the number is. There is 170 ways of explaining sugar, of saying
Oh,
sugar,
yeah.
are ingredients that are sugar that aren't said that sugar. How do you what's your take on that? So do you have to be really, really careful about all these not sugars?
Hmm. Yeah, I never ate those things actually. Also,
Okay.
10 years ago. No, yeah, that's
Good.
just naturally isn't part of my diet. If I look at what my parents made for me, I mean, there was the occasional pre-made package of spices or sauce
Yeah.
that you would add to your vegetables, rice, and chicken, but those are relatively clean in the Netherlands. I mean, they don't add too much sugar to
Yeah.
those things. I mean, the sauces obviously, yes, but
Yeah.
yeah, so I don't have really strong opinions about it.
Good, because that
And
means you're not eating things with a bunch of ingredients in
yeah,
it.
yeah,
That's it. That is
yeah.
the best. Well, we should probably let you get on with your evening. Man, Peter, it's been an amazing chat. I really, I think you bring so much personal wisdom to the table. And, all your videos really like I love the combination of the sometimes they're really funny, other times they're just, hey, this is what it is. And how can people get a hold of you if people have questions about it? Are you like, where do people find you?
Yeah, also I'm on social media as the Dutch Carnivore, and on TikTok, I separated the diabetes content from the carnivore content. I mean, it's still called carnivore. I'm called T1D carnivore, and main reason for that was, yeah, just like the word keto is a bit difficult for type 1 diabetics. I mean, I started with that channel. It was mainly carnivore actually, and at some point I got a lot of type 1 diabetics flowing in.
Yeah.
But I also noticed that strange things were happening. Like a lot of those people, they disliked the carnivore content.
Okay.
And but I was really attracted to the fact that there were a lot of type 1 diabetics, and I'm actually now maybe even almost more than with carnivores. I'm in contact with type 1 diabetics.
Good. Yeah.
Um, I wish I had done that when I was just diagnosed, because back then, I mean, social media was smaller, and
Yeah.
for me, it's also like, I mean, now I feel comfortable, but for me, it was not very natural to go on social media to do those things. But yeah, it's a lot of type 1 diabetics. It's nice to see how they are also during early diagnosis, how they are dealing with it, and that you can help them. Yeah,
And
so that's on my TikTok. Yeah,
you have a YouTube channel, right?
yeah, and on YouTube, I'm also called Dutch Carnivore, and that's a sort of mixed channel. So both
I
diabetics and carnivores.
I'll make sure I post all the links in the description. But
Yeah, nice, thank you.
Peter, thank you so much for this chat, man. I look forward to any time. Like I look forward to having some more with you, and you bring an interesting perspective and a very important message to all the type 1 diabetics out there that that are maybe lost. And if you are, there's people that will help. And by all means, I think you would make a great not only mentor but somebody to look up to because you're doing good things. And thank you.
No, thank you too. I enjoyed very much, and I really like to yeah, to do this cross pollination. I think having this conversation, it worked perfectly. It's to have this cross pollination between diabetics and non-diabetics, because yeah,
Totally.
it's we
And
can learn a lot from each other. Eh? I mean,
exactly. And there's lots of stuff that's what I was going to say is that, it's kind of the stuff that matters relates to everybody, and
yeah,
that's
and you said it during the video, I think, but it's really true that if you do the things that are right for a non-diabetic, well, that's probably not a coincidence, but
yeah,
that's just also the best thing to do for a type 1 diabetic. So basically, we have to be healthy,
yeah,
lead healthy lives.
that's it. So, well, I want to say thank you. We won't take up any more time. We'll do a number two for sure if you're down because
Yeah, I
any
would love that. It's yeah.
and we will talk very soon. Thank you so much, Peter.
Have a nice day.